Hello everyone and most welcome to H721, and I will today discuss something I call inflation of knowledge or inflation of knowing. Let me sketch out the general idea. It's a little bit like knowledge is everywhere and owned by everyone. Therefore, knowledge is nowhere and owned by no one. Knowledge is not localized and it cannot be owned. It's a little like you go to a certain place and there is knowledge and you can purchase or kidnap it and bring it with you in the very bucket that is your mind. And one take on this is that the kidnapper of knowledge, as we previously mentioned, the reflective consciousness, becomes in a way stern and overconfident. It knows more than it actually knows. Tendencies to stretch one's capabilities outside what's possible. We all know today that, for instance, and this is an example only, education has become incredibly common and time-consuming. And this is almost like a sketch of what I'm trying to get at. We all of a sudden have knowledge for everyone. It's nicely packaged and everybody gets knowable, wise. So we made an incredible step forward in mankind by bringing all this knowledge to everyone and thereby raising the level of knowledge for everyone as an individual, but also on a general plane. Societies or nations worldwide, knowledge has come to accumulate more and more. Our buckets are becoming more and more filled with knowledge. We have this knowledge and it's countable. Yes, it does have the feeling it's almost countable at least. For me, it's something in this that does not ring true at all. How can all of a sudden knowledge be so much more dispersed? And how can we become wiser because this development has been going on, or any development? Does this rhyme well with your bodily thinking? Does that make sense that we become more knowledgeable in a way that would be embodied knowledge, something that is in reality? And what happens with all this extra knowledge is that reflective consciousness becomes megalomaniac. It thinks it knows the whole world. All different areas are accessible to knowledge. They come neatly packaged. You only need to learn the encyclopedia by heart. And then somehow you know the world. These are not arguments. I'm speaking now to your body thinking more. But this is an argument. I'd say that that knowledge is only skin deep. It's this distancing in the objectification process of the world that's playing out its game. By distancing itself from what's around, it becomes easier to sort of spit out like a machine ready-made knowledges, like a big pasta machine screwing out spaghetti like knowledge, and everybody can duplicate that like in a Xerox machine. But for me, it doesn't ring true. I will tell it from my personal stance. And one thing might be, in some cases, that there are regulations when it comes to different scholarly institutions against what they call copying knowledge, imitating knowledge, not having it by heart. And I directly think if you are able to, in a sort of a test, I don't know how it should be constructed, actually can show knowledge in some way, there wouldn't be really any rules against copying, because I have a feeling knowledge cannot be copied. Not by the subject, neither by the reader or receiver of this knowledge, maybe the test personnel. Copying wouldn't mean anything. Either you have the knowledge or you don't have the knowledge. I'm aiming at, if you were to sort of enter into a contest for, let's say, singing, would somebody sort of accuse you of copying somebody else's ability? Maybe the outer form, yes, but the actual skill. And somebody would say that is not your skill, you took it from somebody else. And this gives the feeling it's a coinage, it's a currency knowledge, and it needs to be stamped with some sort of origin, so it could be reproduced, and one could say it's an original knowledge. And I don't really mean here that the person who's copying the knowledge doesn't know it by heart. It's not that I'm aiming at. It's rather that the person that is knowledgeable, that should be showable no matter what. And this argument against copying goes to show that the knowledge is a coinage, it's a generalized feature. And there I feel something is wrong, something is not completely correct anyway. And I'd say that this sort of knowing is without any proper depth. It's not embodied. And what sort of situation have we begin to have then? Well, there is a Swedish expression, empty barrels makes the most sound. And that's a very apt description of this hollowed out knowledge. Those who think they are in possession of knowledge, no matter how hollow it is, they shout it out even harder. They know every area. They know everything in the world. And somewhere in this overconfidence, something is off. I'd say there is a confusion between actually embodied knowledge and a superficial, distanced knowledge. Yes, it's a matter of degree, but some general things could, in this case, be hinted at. As long as you realize this is a matter of degree, there is absolutely no absolute knowledge. You can never say, I know that for sure, because that gives the idea of an original. And it's a little bit like, if I don't know it for sure, I'm stranded with a copy of the knowledge. And I think in these modern times, we have been ill-fed with this superficial knowledge. A little bit like sugar to kids. They get used to it, and in the end, they refuse any other sustenance. It has to be sugar. But it doesn't give them what they need. And it's easy accessible sugar, easily digestible, and makes a very, very short satisfaction. All in contrast to real food. So here we can make the comparison to real knowledge, that is more like wholesome food. It's not easily digestible, it's not even easily accessible, but it gives sustenance to the system. This is the true need of the body-mind system, grounded or knowledge with depth. And this lack of depth is coming from object in space in front of a subject. I can give an example. How many today do not exercise their perceived knowledge in different things and different saying, expressions? I know this, I know everything about the politics in the United States. I know Trump is the worst president than Biden. I know this, I know that. You hear the ring of it. I can, it becomes ludicrous somewhere. I have certain knowledge of whether vaccination is good or not. I met those people that have a complete certain knowledge that is this or that. That cannot be informed knowledge. That cannot be embodied knowledge for many, many reasons. And this is this rather fine point. I say rather fine point. It's when, for instance, Feyerabend says that when you present the theory of research, for instance, at some of the more advanced laboratories today in quantum physics, that is not wrong, that knowledge, but it's not lacking the depth, which is something completely different. And he was working together with the practitioners, and he had a sort of a feel that here it is where it's happened and it's still done by hand. That's a matter of degree. How much are you into it? And for us our laymen, we copy that somehow, or we grasp that, and then we think we have the knowledge. We can overconfidently state either one or the other. To read about something, some discovery, or how to shoot an arrow with a bow, it's correct, but it's not the same thing as actually doing it. And this whole process of making knowledge to a general substance, general unit, which you can acquire, you can take them and gather them, is exactly what leads us to horribly fail in the end. And maybe even that could be, in a certain sense, good. And the worst case would be the areas of knowledge that we cannot test it, or testing would be very hard. So we are going to continue to live with the misunderstanding that we really know that, when in reality we're just holding the surface of something. And I want to take this into a personal level, into our own minds, and what this sort of tendency does that. And this is to sort of explicate much more than I've been able so far what this is about. We need proper knowledge to understand ourselves, and doing the same, as I mentioned before, within the own self system, in the self-regulation. It's very damaging, and people who work with helping others, like psychotherapists, some of them noticed. I found one, Michael Yapko, and he has something called global thinking. So when he has a person that he talks to sees, a patient you might call, active person, when that person has what he calls a global thinking about himself, I'm talking now only on the self, not about lab results from research area in quantum physics, or politics, or the water supply of Gothenburg. But it's similar. Now, when they talk about themselves, the two talk in a distant way, and then they are able to make overconfident judgments about themselves. and those judgments will not be informed by knowledge. It will not do the trick, will not serve as sustenance, because if you were to develop, maybe you suffer from a neurosis, you need to know how to get out of it. That needs to be done properly. There is a reality on the mind side. And generalized, globalized thinking won't do that. And in this case, it gets more refined. If I'm saying to the psychologist, as he explained, Michael Yapko, I'm worthless, it's not so much that it's wrong to think negative of yourself. It's a distant knowing. It's the level that's the problem. It's almost like you see yourself from the outside, an impossible outside or transcendent side. This is not the things that will help you to find your way in the jungle that is your inner system. The opposite would be equally bad. I'm fantastic. How many neurotic people don't say that? Who don't think that about themselves? You need to do things practically on a level where you can actually go step by step and do things. And there's another problem that globalized thinking does in our own system. It becomes somehow the judge for reality. It becomes an inner system for understanding things. Now, whereas it is distance as it is here, it will not give sufficient embodied knowledge for you to do things successfully. Reality is, in a way, as I mentioned before, non-dual, and not taking the body in regard, not as an object, but truly embodied, is important for the success in what you are doing. And this play out each other. The lack of success will further worsen the aggravated state within the person who's neurotic. So it's a double movement here that makes it worse. And then that person will have even further reason to say that I'm worthless because I was not able to do that. So it's a rather horrendous moment 22 here. The inaccurate judgments that come with global thinking also make us do not very well informed decisions or actions. And that feeds back into the system, and that will make everything work even less accurate next time. So it's an increasing maelstrom of being further and further from the juicy part, where the reality is. And somewhere in this development you will acquire what one could call, without objectifying that, being a representationalist. And then that could be taken even further away from the real. We need knowledge. Knowledge is something That is incredibly important. That is our true sustenance. And this is necessary. There must be knowledge in the world because we have time and we have space. Therefore, it must also be knowledge. And this is a completely different approach to explain what on earth is object in space in front of subject. That could be explained in different ways, and I think that's very important because the different ways helps to loosen up this idea of what it is, making the borders a little softer. And in this softening comes understanding. It's a little bit like the borders, the objectifying borders make it hard to get close, almost like a frontier that's impenetrable, like a Berlin Wall. But it's not absolute, it's relative. But it is very, very similar, this, as what we see in mathematics, earlier mentioned by Gödel. And that's a little bit, knowledge is everywhere, therefore it's nowhere. And in Gödel with numbers is all numbers are in some sense equal, just more or less of them. But the coinage is equal. And what he tried to prove was that we don't need anything else. We don't need any reality or any meaning to it. Everything can, so to say, could work out fine without any reality. And that does not work, as he found out. For obvious reasons, I'd say. And this is also the equality when it comes to materialism, that all atoms in some sense, in some particular sense, are equal or the same. And it also goes into the area of identity, that something could be identical to something else. All this, I'd say, is caused by this generalizing tendency. And thinking, when I mention here, thinking is equal, that makes also talking equal, and written text in some sense equal in this specific aspect, which means that everybody in some way understands every text exactly the same. Whereas I would say, just because it would not be any understanding if it's the same. And the same is even an impossibility, whatever that would mean. This is, of course, putting some aspect of the self inside the receptacle of object in space seen by a subject. And thinking itself is being put into the receptacle of object in space in front of a subject, and it becomes distance. And then you start thinking globally, away from the actuality, the presencing of everything. Away from the start, away from the root, away from the must. And of course, this is exactly it. And I think this goes back to what mentioned before. This is the transcending, if you call that, making a word. Transcending or transcending. That's the actual act of transcending. going away somewhere, going further away. And this will further the cleft in the self. And this is establishing, making firm, making stable this reality with the causal connection between these different actions. And you could also put in the self who sees this in the end and understand it to be this way. And becomes more and more locked in, unmovable. This is, of course, the unmovability of the body. That is why it's so important that the body is in on the understanding. It needs to be taught, trained. It needs to be in on everything. Cannot be left outside. Therefore, we need to understand these limits. And global thinking, you probably can discover that in yourself, like you have some sort of global thinking more global thinking late in the afternoon, possibly when you are in stress and want to go home to work, from work. You will have a sense of a more globalized thinking. And then you come home and relax, and your thinking is more in the body. And you realize, oh, that's what I thought before was wrong, and I don't have that knowledge. It's not embodied, but I start to appreciate the knowledge I really have. And I will further that knowledge, things I really can understand, because that's the sustenance we need in our lives. That is what's going to inform our actions. Things that inform our action is not known in the encyclopedia by heart. Not at all. Not to any degree. And I think that would show, at least to a certain extent, that that's the wrong way to go about things. And it's not so much he becomes a parrot. That's not the problem. The problem is that all knowledge there is distance. Some of that knowledge you can actually have proper direct knowledge of. Maybe fishing, cycling for instance. But he muddles, when he reads the encyclopedia, he muddles what he knows and what he doesn't know. And that becomes a mess. A little bit like having a spice shelf and some of the spices, the little cans that were finished, and you fill them up with anything that you found. Because they had a sale down in the market and you bought loads of spices and you filled them up. That will not do for proper cooking. You're going to be tasting horrible. Most probably. Michael Jaco had a certain way of going about explaining this to his patients, and he said that tell me in all different steps how you go about going to the bathroom and having a shower, in every step. And they made like 50 steps or something, and then you can point out how you missed a step. That won't result in a proper shower. If you miss that point, take the socks off. You will not have a proper shower. You will have the socks in the shower. And they wonder, why do you take this example? It's the same with your inner doings. They need to be proper as well. Steps cannot be jumped over. And I think the whole Western idea of the complete unreality of the mind, or the mind side, or the subjective side, also plays a role here. It makes us even more ignore ourselves, our bodies. Yes, that's without a doubt a really strong tradition in Western society. The rejection of reality, body and all that. But that's another lecture entirely, I think. But it does come into play. I say thank you very much here from Hisingen. It's become dark, and I wish you all a very pleasant evening. Goodbye.